In this video I'm going to show you 5 great stitches for embroidering letters. So if you want to have a go at these letters, I've put the whole alphabet on a download for you. You can get this from the website. I'll put the link in the description below, and you can print this off and then you can just trace the letters that you want to use onto your fabric and have a go at these yourself. So I'm going to use these embroidery threads, and these are stranded cotton, so there's 6 strands, and these are really good because you can choose how many strands and how thick your thread is, but I'm going to use all 6 in this video. I'm going to start with a nice simple one. This is a really good one to have in your stitch bank anyway, great for a lot of different purposes, but really good for letters as well. So I'm going to just show you the stitch in this line here. So I'm going to work it as if I was working from bottom to top so that you can clearly see how to work the stitch. So I've put my knot out of the way, a small stitch straight up and down, 2 of those, that just secures the end of the thread, come up at the end of the line, and I'm just going to take a small forward stitch about that far apart. Don't pull the thread all the way through, and leave a little loop to the right hand side. You're doing stem stitch, so when you work stem upwards the loop goes to the right hand side. Pull that loop through on the back, pull the thread through on the front. So another forward stitch, leave a loop, loop goes to the right, thread comes up between those 2 points where the thread's coming in and out, and at the end of the first stitch. Pull the needle through, pull the thread through on the back, pull the needle straight. And we're just going to keep working in the same way. Loop to the right, needle comes up between those 2 points, which is the end of the previous stitch, pull the needle through, pull the thread through. Just by doing that in 2 movements I'm reducing the wear on the thread. Makes my thread last a bit longer. So pull the needle through, pull it through on the back, pull it through on the front. Little forward stitch, try and make these all the same length. Loop goes to the right hand side as I'm working upwards. And you see it creates a nice rope effect. So this one makes quite a nice slim line if you want some nice fine lettering. And then to finish off, just going to go down at the end, and then you turn your piece over on the back, just slip your needle under a few stitches to finish it off. So now I'll show you how to work that in a letter. So I'm going to start, this is letter S, I'm going to start the letter S down here and work my way around the shape. So as I did for the sample, pretend I'm working upwards, so this is the bottom and we're heading up. So I've got a knot in the end of my thread, and I'm going to just put that on the top over here out of the way. 2 little starting stitches like we did for the sample. These will get covered up, so do them on the line nice and small, as small as you can manage. I'm going to start right at the point, so little forward stitch. Now on this occasion my loop is going to go the other way because I'm now working down. So if you imagine this is the bottom and this is the top, the loop goes to that side. Little forward stitch. So really the loop now is always going to go to the outside of this curve, because as we swing round you'll see that we're the same way up as before. Forward stitch. Let's just put the thread up in the middle, which is the end of the previous stitch, coming around the bottom of the curve. loop's always staying to the outside of this curve. Pull it tight, pull it through. When you get to near the knot, you can just cut that off. That's a waist knot, so it's nice and neat on the front and the back. Now I can just work upwards, so you can see now as I'm going from bottom to top, you can see why the loop's going the way that it is, always to the right or the outside of that curve. It's a really beautiful rope-like effect to your stitching. So I'm just going to follow this shape all the way around. Don't change the direction of your loop now. As you work around the shape, it will always stay on the same side. So I shall continue on up this shape and I'll show you what to do when we get to the end. Now we're coming up towards the end part, but I just want to show you this part here because this actually crosses over here on the way up. So I've actually stopped the stitch here, took it down through the back, brought it up and started again. So I've got a little bit of a gap so I can stitch straight over the top of that. It's not absolutely necessary, it's a small detail, but it's quite nice if you can do little things like that. Just adds another layer to your knowledge. So I can now go right across that little gap there. And if you're going around a tight curve, you can just shorten your stitches slightly and that will just help you to get around the curve. And to finish off, just a slightly shorter stitch at the end, just to give it a nice smooth point. And again, you can just turn your embroidery over and weave your end under the back and a few stitches on the back and cut the thread off. So that's a nice simple one, and that's stem stitch. So this one consists of two different parts. So we're going to work a back stitch first and then we're going to weave through the back stitch. Really, really pretty stitch, this one. So I'm going to start with this nice pink colour and just do my 2 small stitches again just to start that thread, and we're going to work a back stitch from bottom to top. So take a little stitch forward, a bit smaller than we did for the stem stitch, pull it all the way through, then we come up ahead of ourselves, try and come up the same distance that stitch is away so that these are all an even length, and you take your needle back down into the end of the previous stitch, making a back stitch. And we're just going to do that all the way up. So you come ahead of yourself and back in the end of the previous stitch, back stitch. Try them, do them straight. That one's got a tiny bit wonky, so straight as you can. Nice quick one as well, this, if time is of the essence for any reason. Get 2 more in there, I think. Now, you normally finish this one off on the back, so I should just part that one out of the way while I show you. Then you need to start your second thread off in the same way. So in a design I'll show you where to start that off, but if you haven't got anywhere to start it, you can just weave it through on the back first. So I'm going to come up at the end of the row of stitches, so where I started, and we're going to weave now. So this all stays on the top of the fabric, so I'm going to go underneath that stitch from right to left, stay on the same side and go back underneath the next stitch, like so, from left to right. So this doesn't go through the fabric, it all stays on the top, and you can decide how tight you pull that. You can pull that quite tight and you get a nice thin row, or you can just ease off on the tension a bit and you get a bit more of a interesting shape to it. So just through the next stitch each time, left to right, right to left. And obviously you could change your colours around. It gives quite a different effect as to which one you use for your back stitch and which one you use for the weaving. Don't pull this too tightly, I would say, because it tends to disappear, but just enough so that it's not loose. You can do it in the same colour if you just want the texture to show. That's all there is to it. Nice easy one. That's just come loose because I haven't finished my thread right. So pull that tight and then take your thread down at the end to hide it on the back and just weave it through on the back. So really pretty stitch. So let's have a look at that in a letter. So I'm going to work the letter A this time in this woven back stitch. Now I suggest actually starting both threads off at the same time, and then you've got your weaving thread ready to go. So I'll start my back stitch thread first, and again I'm going to start down here and work my way around the shape. You can start up here and work the other way if you want, it doesn't matter. I'm going to put that one there ready to start. Then I'm going to bring the other thread in that I'm going to actually weave with so that it's there ready to go, and I've got my starting stitches hidden underneath my back stitches. So the same 2 small stitches. Now don't leave it on the bottom, I'm just going to park it up over here. If you leave it underneath you'll get in a nasty knot at some point, so bring anything you're not using back to the top. So now I just work my back stitch around the shape. So if you've got a nice tight curve you can just shorten them just a little bit, that will just give you a nice smooth curve. So come up ahead of yourself, down in the end of the previous stitch. About that stitch there, just come right through it if you need to. Make sure you cover those end starting stitches. So head and back. Head and back. That's all there is to it really, so just concentrate on getting these the same length and getting them in a nice straight line on your line of your letter. And again we've got a crossover here, so I'll just show you what I would do at that point there. Get one more in, so I'm just going to stop a little bit short of that line that crosses over it, so that gives me room when I come around here to go straight through the gap. Leave a little space on the other side. And then back into the back stitch. So I shall go all the way around with the back stitch and then I'll show you the weaving. So I've been all the way around with my back stitch, and because we started the thread off I'm ready to go with my weaving thread. So just going to come up at the end there. Now it doesn't matter which one you start with or which way you go. So underneath the back stitch, just loosen it off a little bit so we can actually see that thread. Now because it's near the end you can go a little bit tighter than you might normally go. That will just make it look like the end's nice and pointed. If you're having trouble getting that sharp needle through you can just turn the needle around and use the eye if you want to. Sometimes that's a bit easier. So just back and forth from one side to the other, going under the next stitch each time. Just weaving in and out of those back stitches. Just want to show you this part here because it crosses over, so rather than have both woven parts crossing over I'm actually going to take that through to the back then come back up as if I was starting a new row. And then when I weave over this part here, that will be the bit that lies on the top. Now you make the decision about what you do where you change direction. These are quite close together here, so I'm not going to realistically be able to weave in and out of all of those. So I think I'll go under this one, it's under 2. And then I'm going to take it down through the fabric and actually finish that off in that point, so we get that nice point to the letter. And then I'm going to come up from underneath this one to carry on up the shape. So there's no really right or wrong way to do that, but just sort of make some decisions so you get that nice sharp point. So that's come out of there, so that will go under there. And then we're off again. So now we're crossing over that first one. Pull that a bit tighter. Going over the top of that and underneath that one, so just be careful not to catch anything underneath. So that's going over the top quite nicely. And then it's a straight run all the way to the end. I'm not going to go underneath this one, I'm just going to slide the needle as if it was going underneath, but then through to the back of the fabric to finish it off, just again so it leaves a nice sharp point to the end. Just pull it a little bit tighter because we're finishing now. And again I'll turn that over, I'll weave that end underneath so I've got a nice neat finish. Really pretty stitch, one of my favourites, so that's woven backstitch. So we're going to have a look at some couching now. So we're going to lay the thread on top of the fabric and stitch over the top of it. So we'll need 2 threads again. So I'm going to use my pink thread on the top and I'm going to stitch over it with this purple thread. So good idea to start both threads off together. So let's put it in position so it's ready to go. I'm actually going to lay it that way because that's how it's going to sit. Now I'm using just 2 strands for the thread that's going over the top because I want the main thread that's lying down the pink thread to be the one that shows more. So I've just taken 2 strands out of my stranded cotton and I'm just going to use that. I'm going to come up here because I know that's where I want to start. So we've got 2 things going on now. So we've got this thread on the top and it's literally going to lie along that line and we're just going to stitch over the top of it. So not a complicated one. So I've come up with my purple, I'm going to go over the top and down the other side. Now hopefully you can see just moving the pink out the way. Don't want to come too wide because it will look like a different stitch. So I'm just going to move the pink out the way, see where my line is, and take my thread down just on the left hand side of the line. Now this couching stitch should be perpendicular, so it should go straight across the pink thread. So that one's going that way and the purple one's going the other way, and that's all we're going to do all the way up. Now the tricky part is getting the distance nice and even. You can see how I'm actually sort of moving the pink one out of the way. I can see where my purple one has come out there, just the other side of the line. And pull this down quite nice and tightly. A little bit further. Bring straight down with that needle, nice and tight. Now I just want to show you something extra you can do with this if you want to. Just put a couple more stitches in. If you want to widen it a bit or add a little bit of a more decorative effect, you can pull the pink stitch up, so just loosen the pink stitch a little bit. Too much. it starts to spread out sideways, so I'll put a couple more in. Just get your needle underneath, just pull that up so it's loose, and then you can just spread that stitch out. Takes a little bit of fiddling with, but just makes a nice effect if you want to do something a bit different with it. And you can thicken up the thread underneath that you're couching over if you want to. You could use two together and you have a nice thick thread underneath. So you can do lots with this stitch, although it's quite a simple one. You can make it thicker, you can change your colours. Just going to pull these out a bit more. Pull them back from there. Just adjust the tension on it. You can spread them out a bit, make them look a bit more. You get a completely different effect, which is quite fun really. Okay, so I'm going to finish off my purple thread. 2 little stitches. I can do this one on the top. And then you'll need to take your other thread down through to the back as well, finish that off. So I'll just go over those purple stitches there, cover that with the pink, through to the back. Like so, finish that off on the back, and then you can just give it a final little fluff up with your needle if you like. And now we'll have a go at that in the letter R. So we've got 2 parts to the R, 2 separate parts. I'm just going to work them as 2 separate parts, nothing more complicated than that. And again, start with the pink thread that we're going to stitch over. Do just check that it does fit all the way around, which it does. Just going to leave that loose, bring in my thread that I'm couching over it with. It's the purple one. I can just start that underneath where the pink one would go. Now I've got a curve on this one, but that's okay. So I'm just going to bring my needle up over the top of the pink, pull it into place. So just a tiny bit closer to get around a curve. You can put the purple one in place first, and then as you pull it down you can just, no, I'm not pulling on that pink one, just letting it lie nice and naturally. Just one side of the line down, just on the other side. Nice smooth curve, and then we're just on the straight all the way to the end. Now again, we've got a crossing part here, so I'm just going to take that couching thread, the pink one, the purple one out of the way, through to the back, just come up the other side of that line, leaving a little gap, and we're so close to the end, but I still think these little details make the difference. So we'll get one more purple stitch in. I'm going to finish that purple thread off. Now I'm finishing it off on this line over here because that's convenient, so as long as you start and finish on a line that's going to get covered, it doesn't matter which one you use, just using the one that's nearby. Back to the top, cut that off, take my pink one through to the back at the end. and finish that off on the back as well. So that's half of it. So all I'm going to do now is do the same for the curvy part of the art, and I might make this a little bit of the puffy couching that we've done. So I'm going to follow the shape around over the top of this gap here, and I'm going to finish down here. So I'm coming up to the end now. You can see that I've just turned that corner. I just put a stitch right on the corner and kind of bent the thread around it, as it were, to get a nice sharp point. So I can just continue all the way to the end now. You could take the thread through to the back at a point like that if you want to and come up again ahead, but either way works nicely. A little bend right at the end to get round, so I'm not pulling on the pink thread, you notice, just letting that lie in the right direction so we get a nice smooth finish to our stitching. I'm going to finish, I'll put one more purple one in, I think, just to finish that off underneath. Right, I'm going to cut the purple one, being careful not to cut the pink one at the same time. And then just to finish that, take the pink over those purple finishing stitches through to the back and just weave it under the stitches on the back. And there we've got a couple of kinds of couching, so just normal couching, a bit of textured puffy couching to finish our couching. So we're going to have a look at cable chain now. Often forgotten over its slightly easier cousin chain stitch, but it is one worth learning how to do because it is a really pretty stitch. So I'll show you that now. So I'm just going to start my thread with the 2 small stitches, not on the top out of the way because that will get cut off. 2 small stitches to begin my thread, that will secure the thread. Now we're going to start as you would for a normal chain, so we're going to make a chain loop like so. Come up inside that loop, that's what makes the chain. Pull it through on the back, pull it through on the front. Don't pull this too tight because you lose the chain shape. Now if we do normal chain stitch, we would go down in the centre there and we'd make another loop and we join all the loops up. This one's got an extra little stitch in it, so if you just put the thread in the direction that you're going, scoop underneath from left to right with the needle and then wrap the thread around the needle. I'll do that a few times, so don't worry, but it's just going around the needle once, and then just keep the tension on the thread there so it doesn't fall off the needle. And then I'm going to take the needle down through the fabric, so just tighten that, make sure that's tight, down through the fabric quite near to the end of that chain. Now don't pull this all the way through because there's our next chain. So coming up inside that, just pull that down, pull the needle through. So it's sort of a chain with a little link on it and another chain. So before we make the second chain, thread in direction going, needle alongside it on the left hand side, go underneath the thread and wrap the thread around the needle. Take the needle through near to that previous chain, keep the tension on that through to the back. Don't pull all the way through because there's our next chain. Try and keep these the same length, just pulling that thread through on the back, take up the tension. You can see how they all connect to each other. So thread in the direction that you're going, left to right, and wrap the thread around the needle just the once. Now what you can do with this, if you take your needle a little bit further this time, keep that tension on it still, your chain link gets a bit longer, so you end up with sort of detached chain links. Don't forget to make your loop for your next chain before you pull the thread all the way through. So you end up, just loosen that off a little bit, it's a bit tight. So you end up with your next chain, but it's on a slightly longer link. So you can choose how far apart you do that. I quite like them close together, but it doesn't matter, whichever distance you like. So I'll do another one like that. So wrap the thread around, so needle goes under left to right, thread goes around once. I'll do another slightly longer one. Don't pull it all the way through until you've made your next chain. You can see you get slightly longer links, so they separate out the chains. So I'll do one more. Inside the loop to make the chain, and you'll need to finish that off because at the moment it's not attached, so you just need to take your needle down the other side of the chain through to the back to finish it off. And that is a cable chain. So let's work that one in a letter. Now think a little bit about where you start your thread in this, because there are gaps in the links of the chain. So if we go chain there, stitch there, chain, stitch, because otherwise you risk not covering your little starting stitch up. If you're not sure, you can just start it on the back. I'm going to do one there and one there. I think that will get covered. Oh, that went all the way through. Let's try that again. Good. So starting at the tip, and we're going to make the chain, so back down the same hole to make our first loop, come up inside that loop about there, pull it through on the back to tension it, pull it through on the front. Now we're going the other way to the way that went when I demonstrated it. So I'm going to just point my needle in the direction that I'm going. So if you always remember what direction am I going in, point the needle that way. So the needle is going to go under now from the top to the bottom, and just wrapping that thread around. Take the needle just past that first loop. This will join those chains up. Don't pull it all the way through because we need to make another chain. So each chain is connected to the next one. So if you pull that through, you've finished your chain. Just tension on the back, pull through on the front. So now we need to make that little connecting chain. So the thread goes in the direction that I'm going, needle goes to the left of that thread, so in that case is on the top, underneath, wrap it round once, needle goes into the fabric very close to that previous chain. Keep the tension on that, helps. Pull that through, make your loop. I'm just going to cut that knot off so you can see. So there's my next loop, back up inside the loop, pull it through on the back to tension it. Just pulled that a little bit too tight, so I'll loosen it off. Thread in the direction I'm going, thread goes around the needle into the fabric, pull that tight. There's my next loop up inside the loop. So it takes a little bit to get the hang of this one, a little bit more complex. So just doing the last one, nice and tight, and then just down over the end of that chain just to secure it in place. Make sure it doesn't move, and I'll finish off on the back. So a slightly more complicated one, but really worth getting the hang of this one. So you may not have heard of this stitch before. It's quite a complicated stitch, but it is very beautiful stitch, so well worth having a go at this one. I'm going to use this variegated thread as well, and you'll see how nice that looks in this stitch. So starting as normal with my two little stitches. Right, start at the bottom, and I'm going to take a straight stitch forward, but I'm just going to come to the side of my line. I'm going to pull all the way through, come back up to the other side, so you've got a little gap between the two. Then I'm going to slide that needle underneath that first stitch. Keep your thread well out of the way. Pull it all the way through. Now, always worth just putting a bit of tension on this, because now we're going to take the needle back underneath and we're going to come up between those two stitches. Like so. So I've really come underneath that first stitch. Hope you can see that, but I'll do it a couple of times. Now the important part of this is that this thread makes a clockwise loop around, because we're going to take the needle up, and as I pull this tight you'll see that loop there, and this comes over the top of the loop, and that loop forms a really pretty part of the stitch. So just pull it gently and you get that beautiful knot in it. So that is one stitch. So we're going to do the same again. So the needle now goes down to the right of that line. How far apart you take this depends on how far apart you want your knots, but I quite like them close together, so I'm going to go quite close to that. So that comes all the way through. Up on the left hand side of the line, about the same distance. Take your thread in the direction you're going. Needle goes underneath that first stitch that we've just made. Pull it to the left. Now it goes underneath again. So it's only going underneath that one thread, coming up between, in the gap basically between the two stitches. Make sure you make the loop so that that thread goes over the top of the loop and the loop forms the stitch. So needle down to the side of the line, pull it all the way through, back up to the left hand side of the line, thread in the direction that you're going, underneath that first stitch, in between the two stitches now in the middle. Make sure this thread makes a loop, so when you pull that through you come up inside the loop. You can see how those colours start to show now and how pretty that looks in this thread. So all the way through to the back, up on the left hand side, leave a little gap. That's where your needle comes out, in that gap, so that gap is quite important. Underneath that stitch and up in that gap, underneath the stitch and in that gap. Now I'll show you what happens if you don't remember to do the loop. You pull it straight, you think, oh, I haven't done my loop. You can just pick up the loop there, needle comes underneath it, turn it over and pull on it. So as long as you don't pull it tight, you can still save it. So I'll do a couple more. Right of the line, left of the line, underneath, pull it to the left, underneath again, comes up in that middle gap there, form your loop if you can remember it. Pull it tight, don't pull this bit too tight because then you lose the nice shape. Down to the right, up to the left, thread in the direction that you're stitching, needle underneath, pull it all the way through. Needle underneath, comes up in that gap, form your loop. I'll just get one more in there, I think. I'll show you how to finish it. So there's quite a lot of different movements to this stitch, but it's just practice. And this is probably the hardest bit, remembering that loop, but as long as you do it slowly, you'll see the loop start to form. Just think, oh, I need to go inside that loop, so when I turn that over, pull it straight, I get my nice knot on the end. And then all you need to do to finish it is just take it through to the back at the end, just to finish off that stitch. Thread under some threads and some stitches on the back to finish it off. So we've got a challenge now. We've got quite a complicated stitch and quite a complicated letter, but don't panic. We're just going to work around it methodically. So I'm going to start here in this little curl. I'm going to come up to the top and follow the shape around. So just take it slowly and stick to the method, and we should be fine. So if we always think of going upwards, as long as we do that, we'll know where to come up and down. So there's my bottom part, the bottom part of the letter. So it's a little straight stitch forward, and it comes just to the right of the line first, all the way through. Then we come up just to the left of the line. The thread goes in the direction that we're going. Following this line, the thread goes along the line. So we're going to come underneath that stitch, and then we come underneath those two and out in that gap in the middle. Now don't forget to make your loop. You can actually wrap it under the needle if you want to, and you won't forget. And then pull the needle through, and then that makes that nice knot. So there's the first stitch. So don't worry about the curve, just keep your stitches nice and close together. So to the right of the line, to the left of the line, thread in the direction that you're going, goes underneath that stitch. This bit can get a bit tricky, but just going under one stitch and you're coming out in the middle of the two. I've done my loop, but there's my loop, so I can just make sure I come through that loop, pull in the direction that you're going to tension. I've got a second knot. Just going to work away around the curve, doing the same thing. So down to the right, up to the left, underneath that stitch, pull that tight, underneath that stitch, out in the gap, make your loop, tension in the direction that you're going. I'm just going to cut that knot off. So I'm actually going to finish that off at the top. There's quite a sharp turn there, so I'm finishing the stitch, and then I'm going to come out from underneath this one here. I'm going to start again and work my way down the letter. So now my needle is going to that side of the line. If you imagine now I'm going down, so my needle is now going above that line there, but it's still to the right of the line if I'm working in this direction. So everything will be a bit topsy-turvy, but just follow the rules and you'll be good. So we're on the last stitch of this, I think. So once more under, once more through the gap. Get to go through the loop. I think that's the end, so just down at the end to finish it off, and just weave the end of your thread under some stitches on the back to finish that one. It's a bit of a mammoth stitch, this one, but don't forget you can pause and rewind as many times as you need to, because you can see it's a really beautiful stitch, so it really is worth having a go at. I hope you've enjoyed these series of letters, stitches for letters, and it's inspired you to have a go. We've got loads of other videos in our stitch library, lots of different stitches and techniques and projects, so do take a look at those. Don't forget to subscribe to get information when we upload something new, and give us a like and a thumbs up as well. So thanks for watching.